She slid the envelope across the table like she was handing me a napkin. Not even an ounce of hesitation. No eye contact, no apology, just her manicured finger tapping once on the top page like a board executive signing off on another quarterly layoff. The envelope was thick, too thick. She had clearly come prepared for war, and all I brought was silence. The date on the papers was deliberate, filed one day before our 20th anniversary. I remember because I had made dinner reservations, still had the confirmation email on my phone. Her dress from the year before was hanging in the dry cleaning bag, untouched. She hadn't forgotten the anniversary. She just decided it didn't matter anymore. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, as if she were the one being gracious. "I've kept things clean. Just sign and we can both start fresh." I looked at her. She wore her cruelty like perfume. Something faint and expensive, noticeable only when she leaned in. I didn't ask why. I didn't demand an explanation. I picked up the pen, flipped through the paperwork, and signed every page without blinking. Every clause, every waiver, every insult. My hand didn't even shake. That seemed to bother her. "You're not even going to contest it?" she asked, suddenly less sure of herself. "No." "Wow," she said, shaking her head with an exaggerated smile. "I guess you really are tired." I nodded once. Not in agreement, just to acknowledge that I'd heard her. Then I stood up, folded the documents neatly, and slid them back across the table. By evening, I was gone. No dramatic scene. No boxes on the lawn. I'd already packed 2 weeks earlier. My new place was a rented condo off the interstate, next to a gas station and a dry cleaner. The walls were thin, the lights buzzed, and the carpet smelled like old coffee. But it was mine. And more importantly, it was invisible. She told her friends I was broken. Told her lawyer I didn't have the energy to fight. Told anyone who asked that I was relieved she had the courage to take the first step. She painted herself as some visionary, some brave soul who had outgrown a life of quiet mediocrity. Meanwhile, I was sipping microwaved coffee in a 2-bedroom rental, watching traffic crawl by, and keeping notes. See, I didn't give up. I just went underground. Because I've learned something after 6 decades. The first to throw the punch isn't always the one who wins the fight. And sometimes the quiet ones aren't surrendering. They're setting the stage. I let her have the house, the Audi, the friends. I even let her keep the dog she never walked. But I didn't let her have my reaction. That was mine, and I wasn't giving it up for free. Most people listen to these stories but don't stick around. Over 97% of you don't even subscribe, and honestly, if you've ever gone through betrayal and come out colder, smarter, sharper, hit that button. It means more than you think. Keeps this whole twisted little therapy session going. Anyway, back to her. 2 weeks after I signed the papers, she posted a photo of herself on a boat. Champagne, fake lashes, that signature divorced and glowing grin. Caption: "Freedom tastes like moat and peace victory hand." I didn't comment. I didn't text. But I saved the photo. Because in this game, timing is everything, and someday that timestamp would matter more than she could ever imagine. I set reminders. Digital copies of the divorce agreement went to 3 separate drives, plus one on a flash stick inside a hollowed-out book. I read every clause like it was a riddle. She rushed it. Her lawyer rushed it. Neither of them expected a man who didn't fight to bother reading the fine print. That's the beauty of silence. It makes people underestimate you. The next few months were boring by design. I paid my rent, cooked my meals, smiled at the cashier who always forgot my name. I didn't reach out to anyone we used to know. I didn't show up at any mutual events. I made myself forgettable. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had one card left. And it wasn't a maybe or a long shot or a petty comeback. It was real. I just didn't know when I'd be able to play it. Yet, then, for months after she filed, I got a call. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and cold. "Mr. Barrett? This is Charles Givens, estate counsel for the late Mr. Howard Kendrick. I'd like to schedule a meeting regarding your inheritance. Are you available this week?" I didn't speak for a second. Not because I was shocked, but because I was smiling. Howard Kendrick. My uncle. The one she always rolled her eyes at. The one she once called a paranoid dinosaur in a tweed coffin. The one I visited every year without fail, even when he stopped remembering names. She refused to come, said he was a waste of time. And now, he'd left me everything. $13 million. No strings, no conditions. No heirs fighting over scraps. Just me. Alone. Legally divorced. Paperwork finalized and signed before the windfall hit public record. The stage was set. She just hadn't realized she wasn't the lead anymore. Hell, she wasn't even in the cast. She expected me to unravel, I think. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Some late-night text. A regretful email. An awkward run-in at a grocery store where I'd stumble over my words while she floated by in something black and overpriced. She wanted the silence to be temporary, a stage in the grief arc. The pause before the beg. But I didn't reach out. I didn't argue. I simply disappeared from her timeline, her routine, her radius. I watched from a distance, an ugly kind of curiosity. Not obsession. Just calculation. You can tell a lot about people by what they do when they think they've won. Her Instagram was a gallery of reinvention. Blonde again, of course. Sun-kissed and single, the caption said under a photo of her in Tulum, holding a margarita that looked more curated than the ocean behind her. Comments flooded in. The usual chorus of affirmations. You're glowing. Always knew you deserved better. Thriving nail polish fire. I didn't like, didn't block, didn't engage. Just watched. Her version of the story was simple. I was the tired man she outgrew. The supportive placeholder. The past. She moved into a high-rise condo that overlooked the lake. Furnished it like a showroom. All gray and chrome and glass. Sterile as a catalog but photogenic. She posted one video doing a wine unboxing on the balcony, panning across the skyline like she'd just arrived at a better life. Meanwhile, I was still living in the place with the humming light bulbs and the smell of gasoline drifting in from the Shell station next door. And I was fine with that. She mistook the contrast for failure. She thought because she was louder, brighter, more photographed, she was winning. She forgot that most predators hunt silently. Her lawyer sent a final email in week 6. A little too cheerful. Probably written by an assistant. We appreciate your cooperation and would like to reiterate the goal of keeping things clean and drama-free. A bow tied on top of betrayal. I replied 2 minutes later with just 2 words. As agreed. Nothing else. He never responded. And that's when I noticed something subtle in her posts. The captions got shorter. The smile a little tighter. One of her freedom friends unfollowed her. Then another. One of the photos was clearly taken by someone else, someone cropped out. But the angle was strange, like it was taken by someone she didn't know that well. The wine glass in the foreground had 2 different lipsticks. Her new life had volume but no depth. It was all presentation. A resume without a job. That's the part that always fascinates me. How people confuse noise for substance. She left thinking silence was weakness. But silence is just patience in disguise. It's knowing that not all answers come wrapped in confrontation. Some answers come later, when the world shifts under their feet and they realize they never saw it moving. She never knew about the coffee shop I started visiting. The old man who played chess alone in the corner. The fact that I picked up journaling again. Pen and paper, nothing digital. She never knew I was reconnecting with my uncle's old legal counsel, or that I'd been quietly researching the tax ramifications of windfall inheritance pre-divorce. She never knew I met with an asset protection advisor 2 weeks before the obituary ever ran. That I'd locked in a trust under a different name. She was still playing checkers in a game that had moved far beyond her board. One day, her post caught my attention. It was a photo of a man's hand on her knee, cropped above the wrist. Caption. Some things come when you make room. That was the first time I smiled. She wasn't posting for her friends anymore. She was posting for me. Which meant the silence wasn't working for her anymore. Which meant she had questions. Which meant I was winning. And I didn't have to lift a single finger. Let them think you're weak. Let them celebrate the first round. Just make sure that while they're clinking glasses, you're reading the rules they forgot to check. His name hadn't come up in years. Not at dinner. Not at holidays. Not even during arguments when she needed something to mock. Howard Kendrick, my mother's brother. The family's living cautionary tale. A ghost with a trust fund and a telescope. Reclusive. Wealthy. Rumored senile. Last seen in public somewhere around 2011 if you believe the tabloids. Most people assumed he died a decade ago and just forgot to announce it. But then, in the 3rd week of February, buried in the lower right corner of the business section, came the headline. Financier Howard Kendrick dies at 82. Estate value undisclosed. No tribute. No scandal. No public mourning. Just a line break and silence. I stared at the obituary longer than I expected. I hadn't seen him in person since the Christmas 3 years before the divorce. The last time she agreed to come, actually. She made it exactly 18 minutes before faking a phone call and having to step out. "He gives me the creeps," she whispered before slamming the car door, like a bitter fossil wrapped in tweed. But I stayed that night. We drank tea, talked about astronomy. He asked me if I'd ever seen a red giant with my own eyes. I said no. He called me a liar and handed me a pair of antique binoculars with a cracked-down one lens. Said, "Look again." Turns out he remembered that. Because the next day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Manhattan area code again. "This is Charles Givens, counsel for the Kendrick estate. May I confirm I'm speaking with Mr. Robert Barrett?" "Yes. I'll be brief. Mr. Kendrick's final will and testament names you as sole beneficiary. Assets are liquid, primarily held in private investment accounts. Estimated value is $13 million, with an additional portfolio in long-term securities. No restrictions, no debts, no contest. He left it all to you." My mouth went dry, but I didn't ask any questions. "Not yet." He mentioned, and I quote, the lawyer continued, "You're the only one who ever listened when I spoke, and didn't interrupt." There was a long pause. "You may wish to retain separate counsel to coordinate distribution and shelter the assets properly. I can provide recommendations." "No need," I said. "I know who I'll call." I hung up and sat in my quiet kitchen with the cracked tiles and the microwave that beeped too loud. The silence felt different now. Not hollow, just precise. I didn't gloat. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pour a drink. I pulled out the same legal pad I'd used during the divorce and began a new list. Title: Moves. Underlined twice. First line: Hire Gerard Feynman. Estate law, aggressive, discreet. He'd helped Howard with something once years ago. Knew the landscape. Knew the shadows. Second line: Establish trust, predisbursement. For protection, optics, and insulation. The less public noise, the better. Let the news get out naturally, through probate logs, financial filings, curiosity. Not from me. Third line: Do not contact her. That one I underlined 3 times. Because she didn't know. Not yet. As far as she was concerned, I was still the man in the shadows. Still driving a 10-year-old Ford. Still renting. Still sipping dollar coffee and living out some kind of post-divorce invisibility retreat. She had no idea the tide had shifted. The best part? The divorce was final. Fully executed. Notarized. No pending claims. No open asset declarations. And every lawyer she'd hired had skimmed the paperwork like it was a checklist. There was one clause, quiet, buried, almost poetic in its simplicity. I didn't add it. She did. All financial holdings, investments, income streams, and future capital acquisitions post-finalization shall remain the sole property of each respective party. She'd insisted on it. To protect herself from my boring little retirement account. I just smiled and signed. And now I owned $13 million, and she owned the memory of calling my uncle a bitter fossil in front of his nurse. The world was about to shift under her feet. She just didn't know it yet. It started with a tap on the shoulder at the bank, of all places. I was finalizing some of the inheritance transfers with a private banker in a glass room tucked behind a frosted door, when I saw the reflection in the pane. Familiar posture. Slightly raised chin. That smug patience she always wore like a cashmere scarf. "Robert," she said softly, like we'd bumped into each other at a farmer's market. Not like she tried to gut me financially less than half a year ago. I turned around slowly. She was wearing the same navy blazer she used to wear to networking events. Her "trust me, I'm professional" uniform. But now she was flanked by someone new. A younger man in a pressed gray suit, with a portfolio tucked tight to his chest. Not her usual divorce attorney. This one had ambition in his smile and something sharper behind his eyes. The kind of guy who wore cologne like a threat. "We were just in the neighborhood," she said, too quickly. "Saw your name on the meeting log. Thought we'd stop in." The banker excused himself politely, clearly picking up on the tension, which hung in the room like cold soup. She stepped forward and placed a neatly folded piece of paper on the table. A copy of the divorce agreement, highlighted in yellow. "We think it's time to revisit the terms," she said, eyes gleaming. "Given the, unexpected changes to your financial status." Her lawyer, Elliot, he said his name was, flashed a preemptive smile, The kind people wear before delivering bad news dressed up as fairness. It's not about contesting anything, he added. It's about balance, equity. Given the windfall, he paused, letting that word float. We believe an amendment to the property agreement would be appropriate. And frankly, expected. She laughed gently, like it was all so civilized. Come on, Rob. It's only fair. You didn't have that money when we signed. And there it was. That smile. That damn smile she used whenever she thought she had the upper hand. The same smile she used when she signed the first agreement and said, "You'll land on your feet. You always do." I leaned back in the chair. No twitch. No sigh. No spark. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. White. Clean. Raised ink. Gerard Feynman ESQ. Private Asset Protection and Inheritance Law. I slid it across the table. No commentary. No smirk. Just gravity. Any questions? I said. You can take it up with him. Her smile faltered. Not cracked, not shattered. But something in the corners curled a little tighter. Her lawyer hesitated for half a second too long before taking the card. He'd heard of Gerard. That much was obvious. Okay, he said, still smiling but with less conviction. We'll be in touch. She looked at me once more. You really think this is how it ends? You get to just walk away with everything? I didn't walk away, I said. You filed. Remember, they left, but slowly. Like people exiting a stage before intermission, trying not to admit the scene hadn't gone as scripted. After they were gone, I stayed seated for a long time. The banker didn't come back. I stared at the paper she'd left, still sitting on the table like a forgotten flyer. It wasn't the money that shook her. It was the stillness, the unreadable face, the lack of panic. She expected noise, emotion, some weak protest about betrayal or fairness or hurt. Instead, she got precision. 2 weeks later, Gerard called me, said her lawyer had sent a draft of an amendment. Half serious, half probing. A temperature check. You want me to respond? He asked. No, I said. Not yet. Let them stew. Because the thing is, when someone sees you as weak, they don't prepare for resistance. They prepare for compliance. They brace for hurt feelings, not legal footnotes. And by the time they realize you're not reacting, you've already made your next 5 moves. Her smile may have returned, but so had my silence. And this time it had teeth. Court was her theater. Always had been. She dressed for the performance. Hair pulled back into a sleek twist, lips painted 2 shades darker than her usual, heels sharp enough to be classified as weapons. She walked in like she was reclaiming lost property, not renegotiating a dead marriage. Her lawyer carried himself with that blend of smugness and caffeine jitters you only get from a recent law school grad who landed one big fish and now thinks he's Poseidon. They sat across from us in the arbitration chamber, both too calm, too casual, like this was a technicality, a mere formality on the road to her upgraded lifestyle. She leaned back in her chair and tilted her head toward me. You know this isn't personal, she said, with the same tone she used when she used to tell waiters they brought the wrong wine. Oh, of course not, I replied. Just good, old-fashioned extortion. Her lawyer chuckled as if he was above it all. Look, we can do this the easy way. A renegotiation, modest redistribution. Something a judge would find reasonable. Or what? My attorney, Gerard, interrupted, not even bothering to look up from the folder in front of him. His voice was pure sandpaper. Elliot cleared his throat, already sensing the ground shifting. Or we can argue that the separation agreement didn't contemplate sudden windfalls of this size, that it was signed under financial asymmetry and therefore lacks informed consent. It was a well-rehearsed line, probably used it a dozen times before, but this time it landed with a thud. Gerard finally looked up and slid a copy of the signed agreement across the table, gently, like he was offering a menu. Did you read Clause 27D? The lawyer blinked. Excuse me? Clause 27D, paragraph 3. Gerard adjusted his glasses. The one she insisted on to prevent liability for my client's pension payout. I watched as Elliot flipped through the pages, eyes darting. He found it, and paused. Her smile began to twitch. Gerard quoted it from memory. All future income, investment returns, gifts, inheritance, or asset transfers occurring after the finalization of this agreement shall remain the exclusive and untouchable property of the respective recipient, regardless of origin or nature. She laughed. A dry, sharp noise. Oh, come on. That's not going to hold. No judge is going to let you wall off $13 million just because of some boilerplate. Gerard didn't laugh. He reached into his folder and pulled out 3 documents. Exhibit A, he said, handing over a printed email chain. Time-stamped correspondence between Mr. Barrett and Mr. Kendrick, dated 2 years prior to the divorce, discussing holiday visits, investment opinions, and a reference to setting things up properly. She crossed her arms. Exhibit B, notarized letter from Kendrick's legal advisor, confirming my regular visits and financial discussions held in private, dated well before the separation. Exhibit C, Gerard said, with something that almost resembled satisfaction, a digital log, cryptographic timestamp, from the day after the divorce was signed, documenting the initial outreach from Kendrick's estate. It includes IP logs, call records, and verified location data showing my client was not in contact with the estate until after all signatures were finalized. Her lawyer tried to object. That's not admissible? It's not a courtroom, counselor. It's binding arbitration. We're playing by the rules she agreed to. She grabbed the agreement and flipped it toward herself like she was trying to catch it lying. Her eyes narrowed as she reread the clause. That's the thing about people who think they're smarter than the system. They read fast, skim the boring parts, and assume the details are just filler. But the details are the game. She had signed away the future before she even knew what it was worth. And now she was sitting in front of 2 men. One who'd built his fortune in silence, and one who had learned to weaponize paperwork. Realizing there was no open door left, no back channel, no clever loophole, just ink on a page and her own signature in the bottom right corner. For the first time in years, she didn't say anything. The silence was deafening. Gerard leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. We'll be declining your renegotiation request. And if you file a formal challenge, we'll pursue damages for frivolous litigation under Clause 34B. I suggest you review that one next. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. Just facts. Just quiet, unshakable facts. They left 15 minutes later. No handshake. No parting shot. Just a flicker of panic behind her eyes and the sound of her heels fading down the marble hallway. She hadn't just lost the money. She'd lost the illusion that she ever understood the rules to begin with. It started with a photo quietly disappearing from her social feed. Then another. Then a gap 3 days, no posts. For someone who used to broadcast every morning oat milk latte and rooftop yoga class, it was noticeable. A digital silence she couldn't control. Her new partner, the one with the tan hands and the half-seen wristwatch from the cropped photos, stopped appearing entirely. A little digging. A mutual acquaintance with loose lips and a little too much Merlot. Revealed he'd moved back to Austin to clear his head. Translation. He realized the shine had worn off and the assets weren't coming. By the second week of April, her condo listing hit the rental site again. Same view, different price, lower. Buried in the description. Previous tenant defaulted. Ready for immediate occupancy. Her posts shifted from breezy inspiration to vague self-help quotes about starting over, resilience, and cutting off the energy that doesn't serve you. But the truth was clearer than any filter she'd ever used. Her independent life, the I'm finally free era she launched with champagne and smugness, was built on assumptions. On borrowed status. On the expectation that someone somewhere would always be paying. And when it became clear that I wasn't part of that someone somewhere equation, things began to collapse. One of her closest divorce tribe friends posted a story from Greece, without tagging her. A subtle exile, but a public one. Another unfollowed her entirely. The friend group that once rallied around her bravery slowly vanished into new brunch groups, new echo chambers. She burned bridges like she thought the coast would stay lit forever. Then, out of nowhere, came the message. Just one. Can we talk? No emojis. No punctuation. Just that flat string of words sent on a Tuesday night at 11:42 p.m. I stared at it for a while, letting my finger hover over the screen like a cat pretending not to care. But I didn't reply, didn't even type out a response and delete it. I just screenshotted it, then forwarded it to Gerard. His response went out the next morning at 9:01 a.m. sharp. All matters were resolved months ago. No greeting. No sign-off. No room for interpretation. Legal. Final. Impenetrable. Silence doesn't echo, it suffocates. She tried once more, this time through a shared old contact. A former colleague of mine who reached out, awkward and unsure, saying, "Hey, I ran into Emily. She said maybe you guys should talk things through." said it's not about the money anymore. That line, not about the money anymore, was funny, because it always was, always had been. But now, the vault was sealed, and even the key she thought she had turned out to be just decorative brass. I thanked the colleague for the message, then asked them never to relay anything from her again. After that, she stopped. Not because she understood, but because she finally accepted that there was no door left to knock on. And even if there was, I wasn't behind it anymore. The email came late on a Thursday afternoon. Subject line, feature request, personal finance spotlight. I almost deleted it, thought it was spam. But something about the sender caught my eye. A real journalist, someone who'd written for Forbes, MarketWatch, and one of those high-gloss magazines you only see in the waiting rooms of expensive dental offices. She was working on a feature, Quiet Wealth, Unexpected Inheritances, and the People Who Got It Right. Said she'd seen my name on a list of recent disbursements from the Kendrick estate. I guess privacy dies somewhere between probate court and LinkedIn algorithms. I'm especially interested, she wrote, in the emotional arc. What happens when someone who was discarded ends up with the final move? I stared at that line for a while. Someone who was discarded. She didn't know she just distilled 3 years of silence, betrayal, and surgical patience into 8 words. We spoke the next day. I told her the truth. Not the dramatized version. No sob story. Just facts. I walked her through the silence. The way I moved out quietly. The clauses buried in paperwork. The inheritance no one expected except maybe me. She asked, "Did you ever consider revenge?" I said, "No," then paused. Not the kind that leaves bruises, anyway. The article dropped 2 weeks later. A glossy spread, 3 pages. My face wasn't in it. Just a photograph of a cracked chessboard beside a gold pen, and a silhouette looking out over a skyline that wasn't mine. But the headline was everything. From abandoned to millionaire. The power of patience. I didn't post it, didn't share it, but I knew she saw it, because 14 hours after the magazine went live, Gerard got a call. Her lawyer, Elliot, was on the line. His tone, Gerard told me, was high-pitched, defensive, already on the back foot. "He's painting her as a gold digger," Elliot whined. "It's defamation. It's character assassination. We demand a retraction." Gerard didn't even sigh, just asked, "Is there a single false statement in the piece?" "Well, no names are mentioned," Elliot hedged. "But anyone who knows the divorce history can." "That's not how defamation works," Gerard cut in. "You don't get to sue someone because your client recognizes herself in a truth she doesn't like." There was a pause. Then the click of a phone hanging up. I wish I could have seen her face when she read it. Not because I needed her reaction, but because she did. She needed to know that the world now had a record. Not of her betrayal, not even of the money, but of the order of events. The sequence she tried to rewrite. She'd spent so long pretending she'd outgrown me, evolved beyond me, traded up. But now, printed and archived on glossy pages across the country, was the truth. She filed. She left. I waited. I inherited. She returned. And I declined. It wasn't a story. It was a timeline. A quiet reckoning dressed up as a magazine feature. For a woman who once said, "Public perception is everything," the irony must have tasted bitter. Because now, it was cream-colored, thick stock, the kind they don't sell in convenience stores. The envelope was sealed cleanly. No smudges, no fingerprints. Just a name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a year. My full name, not the shorthand nickname she used to toss out like it was a joke. No return address. No stamps, either. Hand-delivered. Probably slipped under the door by some courier service she hired to make it personal. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter next to a half-eaten tangerine and a list of plumbing repairs I was ignoring. It stayed there all evening, unopened, like a quiet animal waiting to be acknowledged. When I finally did open it, midnight, no lights, just the glow of the fridge and the hum of the street. I read every word once. No rereads, no pacing, just 3 full pages in her handwriting. Neat, curved, familiar. She started with memories. Nostalgia, the safe kind. The sandwich shop we used to visit after therapy. The creaky floorboard in the hallway we always said we'd fix but never did. The road trip to Asheville where we got lost for 3 hours and ended up finding a bed and breakfast with no locks on the doors. She didn't mention the divorce, or the court hearing, or the 13 million. She wasn't that foolish. Page 2 was where the cracks showed. A softer tone. She used the word lonely once, buried in a sentence about how she missed the way things felt when we weren't trying so hard. She wrote about silence, not mine but hers. The silence in her new condo. How she tried sleeping with a podcast playing, just to hear someone talk. By page 3 it turned more reflective. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for a second chance. But she planted something vague. The line was, "Maybe we were better as friends than husband and wife." A sentence that pretends to be humble but is really a probe. A test. A re-entry attempt disguised as softness. I folded the letter carefully, ran my fingers across the edges, then walked it to the drawer in my office where I keep all legal documents. Birth certificate, property deeds, trust agreements, and now, her. Fireproof. Locked. Categorized. Not because I was sentimental, but because courts like paper trails. And in the event she ever tried to rewrite history or suggest reconciliation, or twist this into some story where I reached out, I kept the door open, I initiated contact. Well, I'd have the ink, the paper, the time-stamped envelope. It wasn't a love letter. It was a statement. One she probably wrote with the kind of trembling hope people only feel when all the other bridges have turned to ash. She wanted me to feel something. Instead, I filed her neatly between revocable trust, Kendrick estate and separation agreement, final copy. And then I went to bed. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because feelings don't change facts. The receptionist at Gerard's office was used to polished shoes and polished lies. She'd seen executives cry and widows rage and trust fund brats try to flirt their way into advance payments. But even she blinked twice when she walked in. Not because of what my ex-wife wore, though it was a little too curated for a casual drop-in, but because of the look in her eyes. Not anger, not confidence. It was need, and she wore it badly. "I'm here to see Robert Barrett," she said, smoothing her sleeve like it mattered. The receptionist didn't flinch. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's personal. He'll want to see me." Her voice cracked halfway through personal, but she recovered quickly, like it hadn't happened. The receptionist nodded once and picked up the phone. Said nothing, just listened. 30 seconds later, she hung up and smiled with a politeness sharpened like glass. "You can wait in conference room C. Someone will be with you shortly." Conference room C wasn't just any room. On the plaque by the door, etched in gold serif lettering, it read, "Legacy Suite, reserved clients only." She walked in without a word. Maybe she thought the name was symbolic. Maybe she thought she still belonged to something legacy-worthy. She didn't. The room itself was designed to feel like power. Heavy oak table. Leather chairs that didn't creak. A window with a view of the courthouse, subtle but intentional. No clocks. No distractions. Just the kind of silence that amplifies everything you don't want to hear in your own head. She waited, and waited. After 20 minutes, she crossed her legs and scrolled through her phone. After 40, she checked the hallway. After an hour, she stopped pretending. That's when the assistant, Angela, precise and kind, stepped in and quietly closed the door behind her. "Mr. Barrett won't be joining you," she said gently. "He has no interest in reopening closed matters." That line wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. Came directly from me. Because I knew she'd show up eventually, not to apologize but to understand, to pick at the scab, to see what I'd become, and maybe, just maybe, to find an opening, a weakness, a crack in the foundation she once thought she built. But there was nothing left for her to interpret. No sympathy, no door left ajar, no second act. She stood up slowly, like she was afraid to make noise. The letter from weeks ago must have haunted her more than I realized. Maybe she thought it earned her a moment, a conversation, something human. But she had cashed out her humanity the moment she filed those papers with a smile. As she walked past the nameplate on the conference room door again, she paused. "Legacy Suite, reserved clients only." It wasn't meant to taunt her, but it did. Because for all the social posts, all the champagne cheers and brave new energy she wrapped herself in, this was the moment she realized there were rooms she'd never be allowed in again. Not because of money, not because of status, but because I had built something without her, and it was built to last. The ballroom was cold in that high society way, where everything was polished but no one made eye contact for longer than necessary. Chandeliers that looked antique but weren't. Plates too small for the portions. Laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. The Kendrick Foundation's annual dinner. The first one since Howard's passing. My first one as the named trustee. They gave me 5 minutes to speak. I took 4. I didn't say much. Just enough. Sometimes, I began. You inherit more than money. You inherit clarity. You inherit the silence people leave behind, and the choice to never fill it with noise again. A few polite laughs. One uncomfortable cough. I used to think loss was about subtraction. Turns out it's just as often about precision. About cutting away what no longer fits and realizing what's left is finally clean. There was scattered applause. Enough to be polite. Enough to close the speech without needing a bow. I stepped down from the small platform, walked past tables with names etched into polished brass stands. Donors. Legacy holders. People who showed up for names on plaques, not the people who bore them. And then I saw her, back of the room, leaning near the exit. Not dressed for the event. Not listed on the RSVP. But there. Of course. She waited until I was alone. Didn't approach right away. Just watched me take a sip of water, greet a few board members, tuck my speech cards back into my pocket. Then she stepped forward, quiet as guilt. Her eyes were lined. Less makeup than usual. The kind of look people wear when they want to seem honest. Or maybe just too tired to lie. So, she said, voice low, this is who you really are. I looked at her for a moment, not past her. Her. The way you look at an old coat you once wore during a storm. Functional at the time, but useless now. No, I said. This is who I became when you left. She nodded slowly, like she understood. But I knew she didn't. Do you hate me? She asked. That one hung in the air. Not because I had to think, but because she needed me to. I looked over her shoulder, toward the double doors leading to the private donor lounge. My name, engraved, in gold, was waiting on a placard by the table inside. No, I said. I don't have time for hate. Then I turned to leave. Paused just long enough to finish the sentence. Just lawyers. She didn't follow. Didn't call after me. Because she finally understood. The final clause had never been in the paperwork. It had always been in me.